Good afternoon. Welcome to another installation of Transitions in Leadership. I am Professor Omiyẹmi Artisia Green. I am a professor of theater and Africana studies at William & Mary and currently a provost faculty fellow and the vice president for professional development here at AFA. And so I am here today with Dr. Tiffany Trent. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let me tell our listeners a little bit about you. Dr. Trent is a theater director and scholar of applied theater, theater for youth, and practical theology. Dr. Trent's previous leadership roles include chair and associate professor with the Department of Theater and Dance at Middle Tennessee State University, and interim director of performance programs at the University of Chicago, her undergraduate alma mater, where she also taught in theater and performance studies for 16 years. Dr. Trent first embraced theater in Chicago through new play development. That includes institutions such as MPAACT, Chicago Dramatists, ETA Creative Arts Foundation, Pegasus, plus Alabama Shakespeare Festival and New Harmony Project, teaching artist residencies at the Goodman, Pegasus, Chicago Arts Partnership in Education, and Illinois Humanities, and understudying in places such as Victory Gardens and the Court Theater. She remains rooted in Chicago and specifically in the Woodlawn community as a board president for Definition Theater Company. Service affiliations for Dr. Trent include the American Alliance for Theater and Education, the inaugural NOURISH cohort with Goodman Theatre and the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, and Youth Theater Journal. She also reads scripts each year for the Young Playwrights Festival with Pegasus Theatre Chicago. Recent academic directing projects include Arbor Falls by Caridad. How do you say Caridad's last name?
Svich.
Svich, and Anonymous by Naomi. How do you say Naomi's last name?
Iizuka.
Iizuka. Current scholarship includes a collaboration with University of Michigan professor and playwright Jose Casas, co-editing an anthology of African-American theater for young audiences alongside scholarship from Black scholars of youth theater. Recent publications include a chapter in Theopoetics in Color, Embodied Approaches to Theopoetics, co-edited by Dr. Oluwatomisin Oredin and Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart-Rush. Beyond campus and classroom, Dr. Trent has served faith-based settings and theological spaces of congregations, seminaries, and wider ecumenical interfaith initiatives through facilitating drama as a part of liturgy, community engagement, and critical interpretation of Scripture. Dr. Trent received her BA in Politics, Economics, Rhetoric, and Law from the University of Chicago, an MFA in Directing from Carnegie Mellon, and a Master's of Divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary, and her PhD in Theater for Youth at Arizona State University. Please help me welcome the very accomplished Dr. Tiffany Trent.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here and to be part of this project. So thank you.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. Okay, so I have 9 questions for you, and we may or may not get through all of them, but I hope they will provide us with a rich conversation and a wealth of knowledge for each other, for sure, because it's always a dialogue, and for those who will catch the replay. So my first question for you is, what catalyzed your transition from faculty member to department chair? And in what ways have your experiences directing applied theater and engaging with community-based initiatives, particularly in Chicago's Woodlawn community, influenced your approach to academic leadership and departmental stewardship?
Wow. I mean, you know, the catalyst in some ways was the pandemic.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, in the pandemic, I think a lot of schools learned a lot about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
about what aspects of their structures held up, and what aspects of their structures were really vulnerable. And and a lot of us, of course, had to switch gears and lead in different ways. And in that time, you know, I was still at University of Chicago when it started, but I was in a leadership position, although not a chair position. Um, and those moments of realizing how universities have resources, how we can convince families it's still worth it to come to
Mm-hmm.
school. We may be online, we may be socially distanced, we may take things out of our doors and out into the courtyard. The way we were thinking about human safety and what aspects of our education we could do was part of what also made me look for new learning opportunities. So the learning opportunity was really something that made me apply for a chair position. And so both of my positions at Middle Tennessee State before and now here at University of Michigan, I applied from outside. And so that's something that may be different for some people who are moving into chair positions because I'm not in the same environment with colleagues and now suddenly in a different position where I'm supervising them in a different way. So that is one thing that would be different. In terms of how community-based work and work in Woodlawn has influenced how I lead, I mean, one of the things I would say is that I am very contextual and very collaborative. I don't assume that what works at one place works at another place. And those are very applied theater and community-based values that you listen for the immediate context and for what their needs are. You know, in Chicago, we are very committed to our neighborhoods. You know, there's food you will eat in one neighborhood, but you would never eat that in another neighborhood because that's
And
not
this
the
is
character
true.
of that neighborhood. And so that value of understanding where you are is really a theater value, right? We read the Violus Bolin exercises or any of the environment exercises that we may learn from any of our theater techniques and our acting techniques. Establishing where you are is the first thing you do. And so that value really translates to the leadership context. You also look around for who the players are and how the community looks to those players and what are their strategies or avenues for keeping those key players accountable to the wider community. And so those are some things that I've taken from the community arts work that really resonate as well in a higher ed context for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In what ways has your work across faith-based and educational institutions, especially at the intersection of performance and theology, prepared you to lead with both creative and ethical clarity in higher education?
Mm. Um, I'll preface this by saying that my faith roots and my theater roots are the same, meaning that I'm someone who didn't know she was a theater kid,
Mm,
you know, because I grew up in predominantly white schools and theater was not as much for Black kids as it was for other kids at
yes.
school. However, in churches, we had dance ministry and drama ministry
Mhm.
before we called it that. Everything was just Sunday school or youth group, and we did all the things. And I didn't realize that I was getting a training until I was in college and found myself looking for that. So those have always been intertwined for me. One of the things I learned through ministry training was how you look at a community as asset based and how you do asset based mapping. So you know, and when I think about how my grandmother and my great aunts said it, you know, there would be a church meeting where they would say, who do what well, right? We're trying to
Right.
figure out who has gifts and how to make room for them to use those gifts.
Mhm.
And so that's something that I feel like I really bring to the higher ed context. I'm really fortunate in the department that I'm in now, where we have a very transparent conversation about how higher ed has a hierarchical structure where faculty have rank. And yet, because of the kinds of careers that faculty members have had, they may not have had XYZ title in one context,
Yes.
but they have had all of this experience and leadership and
Mhm.
respect that they've earned in these other contexts. And so we are very transparent with each other about the assets, about the gifts, about what each person is bringing to the table. And I'm not saying that we dismiss those ranks and titles,
Yes.
because in the higher ed context, that also means that some people are more vulnerable than others.
Mhm.
Some people have some stability that other titles do not have. And
Mhm.
so we recognize that as well. But that vulnerability is separate from the respect and the gifts that they bring.
Yes. Timely. I received that. What pivotal moments or lessons have most influenced your leadership philosophy, particularly during times of institutional growth or change?
Ooh. Uh, you know, one, I feel like I'm going back to the pandemic a lot, but
And
that
that's
was a lot
okay.
of change for sure. Um,
Mhm.
there was another instructor, Devin DeMayo. I always want to give credit where credit is due when I'm quoting somebody. Devin is a Chicago director and instructor who teaches at University of Chicago. And we were in a meeting where Devin said, if I assume that everyone is caring for someone, I can be so much more patient. And,
Mm,
you know, again, that's like an old piece of advice. You never know what somebody's going through. You don't know what people are going through. But if we assume that they are caring for someone, and the way that impacted me is specific because I'm by nature a relatively patient person in terms of my personality.
mhm.
But how are we patient in terms of our policies and practices is something different. You know, it's one thing for a leader, a chair, to just be nice to people and offer them some affirmation or assurance as a person. It is another thing to embed in the steps of how things unfold in our department, practices that give people time, that leave points of intervention for questions, time for the step forward, step back. You know, how do we bake in listening to one another, reflecting on that, and regrouping or coming back to the table? And so I
Mhm.
talk about patience not just as how we treat each other interpersonally, um, but how our structural practices give people time.
In the spirit of that, I ordered these questions intentionally. I almost feel like I want to follow up this question,
Okay.
right? With my question number 6,
Hmm.
which is, as a department chair, what approaches have you found most effective in mentoring, right? In the spirit of baking in patience in our policies and practices. What approaches have you found most effective in mentoring faculty through the promotion process? and in cultivating future departmental leaders, especially among those who may not see themselves reflected in traditional leadership models.
Sure. One of the things that we have to do as theater people is certainly make ourselves legible to others. Theater departments are often housed inside of a school of communications, or in our case, a school of music, theater, and dance. Ours used to be a school of music. I've also been where it was housed within the Humanities division and not its own department at all. And making ourselves legible to others. So helping other faculty members translate what they do is one aspect of mentorship. Another aspect is delegating. And part of what delegating does, asking for help, gives people a chance to show what they can do. There are some things that maybe I could do, but if I'm always saying, let's look to so-and-so for some
Right.
input and insight on that, then I'm uplifting that person's skill set. And lifting them up in front of other people in a public way
Yes.
to celebrate what they do. It's not enough to just delegate through email, but also to name them in a faculty meeting, to reference them when I'm writing to the dean about something. I'm working with so-and-so who's having a part in this. Just making sure that I'm putting their name out there so that someone is aware of that labor. I'm always emphasizing the collaborative aspects of what we do. I mean, that's very natural for us in theater. The work doesn't get done without these multiple parties. And I also encourage people to really highlight their uniqueness. This is also one of those preaching to myself things, because it can be so easy to look at the wonderful things other people are doing, but the reminder that, well, someone else is doing that. And what we need you to do is this other thing,
Right.
because that's already happening. This other thing is what you bring. And so highlighting that uniqueness for me is definitely a part of the mentorship as well.
You said that you've been talking a lot about the pandemic. Either you can go back to the pandemic or you can go back to another moment. But in the spirit of strategies for developing leadership and identifying potential, what leadership strategies have helped you guide others through periods of disruption, such as paused performances, uncertain funding like we're experiencing right now, or collective emotional and physical exhaustion as we are experiencing right now?
Wow. One of the things that one leadership strategy is really just making sure that we gather.
Mhm.
People can feel really alone in what they're doing.
Mhm.
Some of the deliverables and productivity that we're supposed to manifest in higher ed can require a lot of independent work. And so strategy gathering so that people know they're not alone is really, really important. However that gathering looks, it can mean knowing that there's something we have to talk about. And sometimes, I feel like I've done this twice recently, that I've put out the poll for the meeting time before I know what the agenda exactly is. But we're in a place where the team needs to know that I'm going to prioritize this. And then inviting people to add to the agenda. Sometimes setting the time, making a Google Doc where people can add to the agenda.
Yeah.
It seems so simple, but it sets the priority. It sets the priority because if I waited until I knew what I was going to do, it would take too long, and they
Right.
would wonder if I'm paying attention.
Mhm.
And so sometimes just letting them know that I'm going to prioritize something right away is one thing that helps. We just did, again, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. One of our directing faculty, Helena Kays, proposed the story circles from John O'Neill's work with Junebug Productions, back in the day, in the civil rights movement. But that was a way of having a structure where we could all just gather and talk about things that were going on in the world, have cross dialogue between faculty and students, with an equitable container for voices to be heard. So that was something that came out of me saying, I don't know what we're going to do yet, but here's the time. And then inviting people and someone saying, I've done these story circles before. This would be a way of everyone hearing and feeling like they've got small group within this larger context.
Mhm. I like that. These last couple of questions are about pathways to leadership. So the first of these is, how can emerging faculty who aspire to mid or senior level leadership roles within academic institutions, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, position themselves for leadership roles without compromising their values or overextending their labor?
Mm. I mean, I would say the values are why they want you.
Mm,
The values are why they want you. And so maintaining your values, you have to be able to sleep at night.
yeah.
This question takes me to things my father taught me, really. He always said, wherever you go, your name gets there before you. Want to be
Yes.
able to walk up and meet it. And uh, uh yeah, we the values are the thing you have and the thing you can always have. I feel like I'm answering the question with the question in some ways, but and so maybe the question is, what helps you hold on to your values? And that might
Yes.
be, who do you call? What do you read? What is your spiritual practice or your exercise practice? Who are those students who are looking to you, who you want to model? Like, do you want to teach what you're doing, what you're modeling right now? And I've had that moment. I had a moment of having young women watching an exchange between me and someone, and me wondering, do I want these young women to put up with what I'm putting up with right now?
Mhm.
Right? And how can I model for them a way to redirect? Because I would like to teach them something different right now. And so that is one way to think about your values, is to turn it and ask, what am I teaching and what am I modeling? And whether I feel good about that. Because that's important. That's important. And then gosh, the other part of that question,
Yeah.
overextending labor.
Yeah. How to do it without overextending the labor. Is that possible?
I would say, I wish I could say I had some great way that I never do that. That wouldn't be honest. But I do think things can go in waves. I think
Mm,
there can be ways of understanding the rhythm of your academic year, the rhythm of a month, the rhythm of a semester, the rhythm of a week. And that's one way to do it, and to know that there will be a break. I'm very impressed with people who can do that in a 24-hour rhythm in a way that makes each day healthy. Um, and I do think, whether that's anything from, you know, taking a walk and making yourself walk outside of your building to walk back in, even if that's 3 or 4 minutes, but you stood up and realigned your body and changed your breathing,
mm,
to the apps that do those 25-minute alarms, because science shows that that's our best, unit of attention span when we're writing. Whatever those practices might be, to do that physical check-in with oneself, I think is important. In terms of overextending the labor, in terms of commitments, I think, this sounds simple, but in my last position, I really used a paper calendar, and I allowed myself to splurge on a planner that I thought was organized in a way where that handwriting was so good for me. I'm now in an environment where the Google Calendar is everything, and so I use it. And even if that's wouldn't have been my chosen modality, because of the collegiality and ease that it promotes in this department, it
mhm,
does work for me because
mm,
it saves time.
mhm.
And so I think being able to identify what you gain in different ways of working, in whatever environment you're in and whoever you're working with. Um, and that's another piece too, finding your partners, in your department, in your front office, in your dean's office. There are things that, I've been so grateful in every position I've had where there's someone who's like, this could actually just go completely off your plate. When you need XYZ, email this person or ask for this. And so again, finding those partners in your role can often streamline things so much.
There's a question that I didn't think of initially, but I'm gonna save it and circle back to it because I think you're onto something here. The next question about pathways to leadership, since you reference deans, what strategies have you found most effective in building productive relationships with senior academic leaders, such as deans and provosts, particularly when advocating for the needs of your department or advancing new initiatives? And maybe even advocating for oneself, right? Because you are currently a department chair, and so you're doing this on a regular. But some who will watch this on the replay may not be in a leadership role, but that is still a pathway to leaders, to developing leadership and demonstrating leadership potential, building a relationship with a dean or provost. And so you're still having to advocate for yourself.
Mm.
So, what are some strategies that you have found productive in doing this relationship building?
One is that I have found that a thank you goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
A genuine thank you with a detail or two about how that yes that I got from them played out or what impact that had. Just want you to know, that bit of money that sent students to this thing, this student got these awards.
Mm.
Just those bits of thank you and update about the impact of their support goes a
Mhm.
long way. Because they're not going to know that that student got that award if I don't tell them.
That's right.
Or that faculty member's grant had this other impact. So advocating for the faculty is also affirming their leadership,
Mhm.
right? And so so that's one thing. And then another is I feel like this is the third time I've said ask for help. But there are ways to include them or let them know the couple of factors I'm weighing in a decision that I've almost made. But that demonstrates to them the labor that I've already invested in being able to frame the situation, right? I've looked at this, I've looked at this. We can make one of these two decisions or one of these three decisions. So I'm demonstrating that. I'm also letting them know that I trust them by including them. I'm letting them know that I'm going to be transparent, that they will not have any surprises, that they're not going to, like my mother says, they're not going to hear something in the street. And so those things are important. And I think this also goes back to kind of what I said about asset-based mapping, that if I'm able to say operate like from a resource-rich environment, because this faculty member has this network and this faculty member is doing this and this is happening because of like the great resources and gifts in the department, we now have this other opportunity.
Right.
Right? And so painting that asset-based sort of, this thing that I'm asking you is only possible because of the capacities and skills and talent that we already have. And that allows me to advocate, include them, and hopefully, really elicit their support.
Mhm. Sound. Uh, this is not my final question, but it was the final question that I planned in advance. How do you see emerging technologies, particularly AI, shaping the future of theater, education, and production? And what ethical or pedagogical considerations should leaders in the field be thinking about as they engage with these tools?
Mm. So on the one hand, I feel like I have definitely been someone who has been avoiding AI as best I think I can, even though I'm told I'm not, because Google fills in things for me. I don't type the whole word or the whole phrase. Um, and I like to think that I give a lot of AI proof assignments in class.
Mhm.
I do. I like to think that for a lot of the work.
Okay.
However, when I think about what you're asking, there are a few things that do come to mind, especially when you bring in the language of ethical and pedagogical considerations,
Mhm.
because those are very meaningful. A lot of our students define themselves as multi-hyphenate. They do a lot of multidisciplinary arts. They are working across theater and content creation and film and TV and podcasting and lots of other modalities.
Mhm.
We have to keep up with them.
Yeah.
And so from a pedagogical perspective and from an interdisciplinary art making perspective, I do think we have some responsibility to help them use those tools with integrity
Yeah.
and to teach them to still believe in their imagination.
Mm.
And then
Mhm.
so that's the pedagogical side. And I use the same words for the ethical side. You know, integrity is everything. Integrity is your good name, you know, and so even as AI brings up questions of originality and authenticity in your work, the integrity of being able to articulate and demonstrate what you've done, where you've strategized using tools for efficiency, much like making a footnote. You know, if you read a lot of authors, good on you for reading, and then note them in the footnotes and the bibliography, and that is scholarship. You know, and so how, but and you may add them up differently. You're interpreting differently, and that is valuable. So to continue to teach them how to value their own imagination and ideas, that those things can't take a back seat. Another thing that I think about with this is the kind of pedagogical generosity, this is what I call it, that I saw, you know, during the pandemic with people sharing exercises, sharing their syllabi, sharing their resources. And so the other piece I bring into dialogue with AI is remembering that you have a community of resources that you can credit and attribute, that we don't have to choose AI as our efficiency model. We still have each other as part of our efficiency model. And I think that is really important. And theater faculty are also being invited into corporate settings, into law schools for the storytelling skills that we have and the shaping narrative skills that we have. And so, like understanding that, you know, that personal touch, that personal relationship that we're taught to embody, that truth that we can voice, it's still gonna shine. I think that is always gonna shine.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on my question to just first check in with our guests and see if there are any questions emerging from the floor for you, for Dr. Trent. Hi, Amy.
Hi, this is Amy Hughes. Thank you so much, Omiyẹmi, for doing this series, and to Dr. Trent, who I have the honor of being a colleague right now. And I know I have access to your wisdom on a more daily basis, but I thought that other folks might benefit from your wisdom on this question. As you know, of course, COVID continues to resonate, which is something you've really highlighted in your answers today. And now we're also confronting a second Trump administration that is more aggressive in terms of attacks on higher ed in general. And the cultural, and specifically using the levers of cultural disagreement, such as making diversity, equity, and inclusion incendiary concepts and words, weaponizing those words. So in this moment, where we're feeling these political, social, and financial pressures, what are you as chair, or what advice would you give to other campus leaders about how to support each other and our students during this time?
That's a thank you for the question. I mean, I still start with what helps you sleep at night. I do. I start with that. I start with integrity. Gosh, I really lean on integrity and imagination. And I lean on those because I mean, maybe I'll go back to one of Omiyemi's questions actually, when you asked me about the interplay in terms of faith practice and theater practice.
Yes. Mhm.
There's some scholars, and I'll come back to the tangible, Amy, but you're sending me in a scholarly direction to come back. From Theater of the Oppressed, Theater for Social Change, Augusto Boal's work, who of course was a contemporary of Paulo Freire for our education people, and Freire sort of educating for freedom, and Bell Hooks, who follows also that sort of pedagogy of the oppressed and how we escape our banking system of education. I put Theater for Social Change and educating for freedom alongside liberation theology and womanist theology.
Mhm. Mhm.
I do. And so like those buckets make up my practical theology piece.
Okay.
So even as we're in a time where terms and language are painted, to using these words, as incendiary or weaponized, womanist theologian Katie Cannon said that, you know, the Bible is a thesaurus. And I loved that when I read it because a thesaurus was my favorite book growing up.
Mhm.
There's so many words. There are so many words. I like poetry. I grew up memorizing lots of poetry. I grew up listening to lots of preaching. I grew up reading lots of plays. There are so many words to use.
Mhm.
And so when I look at how someone like Rhodessa Jones was going into prisons to teach dance and yoga, except that then they made all these plays and did all this storytelling
Mhm.
that really dealt with the relationships that women were grieving, being away from their children, the skill sets they have that the world will never get to experience. I I think that things that are right and true
Mhm.
will happen
Mhm.
because we're doing our jobs. And so um you know, all these pieces are encouraging us, even as we study the Aristotelian poetics, the story where there's one protagonist, and we live in a world where we have to have multiple bodies at the center of the story. And we live in a world where those bodies will not be the same. And we are so lucky as theater people that we have myriad tools to open pressure valves. We have myriad tools for that. And this is what brings me to the imagination and the integrity. Our integrity is always going to tell us when we have to open that pressure valve. We have to open it and let that pressure out. And our imagination is always going to show us a new way. I don't know if this is tangible enough, Amy, for what you are asking me, but I feel like there are so many shoulders we stand on where we have seen this before, and someone has found ways to continue to open doors and windows. And so what I feel fortunate about is that I don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? I can call these names of scholars or practitioners who have shown us something else, have shown us different ways, have shown us the many ways we can apply what we know and what we do. And it's what we're paid to do.
In the spirit of shoulders that we stand on, in many of the episodes of transitions and leadership, I have created an opportunity for our guests to talk about or to name the shoulders that they stand on in their teaching, their research, their leadership. And since you opened the door, I'm gonna just open it further. If you would like to name those shoulders that you're standing on.
Sure. I always start with Ethel Jean Jackson.
Mhm.
When I was a little girl at church who did the dance ministry and the pageants and told me I could do the morning announcements and that I could MC the program.
Mhm.
I start with Ethel Jean Jackson, who entered me in the old school oratory contests that
Mhm.
Black churches in the South used to have. Um, Cheryl Lynn Bruce
Yes.
in Chicago
Mhm.
was my first mentor, mentoring me through teaching artistry through a program that the Goodman Theatre used to have in the Dearborn homes. Willa Taylor, who was in years after that, the education director at Goodman and who piloted that NOURISH cohort with Michael Road and his um, civic practice. Willa Taylor taught me a lot about how our skills apply to community. Jonathan Wilson was the chair of theater up at Loyola University. May he rest in peace.
Yes.
And allowed me to assistant direct him around Chicago. I've named Katie Cannon as a womanist theologian. Almeida Wright, Dr. Almeida Wright, who is a theologian who really works on the theology of African American youth. Dr. Evelyn Parker also works in the theologies and spiritualities of African American girls, teenage girls. James Evans Jr. is a constructive theologian who really helped me understand, our sociocultural hierarchies of humanity and how this underpinning of social hierarchy gets intertwined with sort of religious culture.
Mhm.
And so those are people who have helped me find my voice as theater practitioners, as theologians, as performance studies scholars. Robin Bernstein, who really looks at how objects and articles teach children who they are and how they're supposed to perform with those objects for grown-ups,
Mhm.
and how that gets embedded into us. Um, yeah, there are so many who have been a part of me learning how I can contribute.
Okay, so the question that I thought about when you were speaking specifically about how to manage time,
Mm,
and in some ways gesturing towards how to say no without using that language.
mm,
So I'm in this moment now where I'm trying to think really deeply about what is most supportive in terms of workshops and conversations for those who are trying to make their way through the ranks of the academy. And not pigeonholing this to what do assistant professors need or what do associate professors need, but just broadly speaking, we enter the academy And some of us, because I don't think that this is a goal for all, as I listen to many people talk, but some of us, do have a goal for full professor. And I'm interested in if you could name a handful of workshops or conversations, thematic, that you think would be helpful for faculty navigating themselves through the ranks, and not navigating themselves alone. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your journey, but you will have support along the way. But what are some thematic conversations or workshops that you think would be helpful? I hear learning how to say no is one of those.
Learning how to say no is one of them. And not just know in general, but to really know what questions to ask about an opportunity. What is a no? What is a not right now? Because some no's are never, and some are just not right now. Some would be no, unless XYZ. Some no's are unless I get a course release or unless I get a research assistant. And then that no might change. And so I think there's some ways to unpack what the factors are, and then the learning how to say no, especially if some of those T's don't cross and those I's don't dot, then yeah. I would say another one might be types of, I think a question that a lot of faculty do have, especially in theater because of the nature of what we do. Some schools are really good with RCA, research and creative activity,
Yes.
and how to help faculty strategize what projects manifest as creative activity, which ones manifest as scholarship, and really making sure that they are asking the questions and talking to the right people about books versus articles versus plays versus master classes. Are you designing? Are you directing? Because different schools place different kinds of value on those projects at different points in a career. And what are the venues and environments for those? Because every school, every department is going to have its values.
Yes.
And so I think a workshop around that, these are projects we may think we understand, and there's so much nuance. There's nuance within disciplines as well. I'm a chair, but I am not a designer. I'm not a costume designer, a scenic designer, a lighting designer. And so there are nuances that I have to make sure I ask somebody else to make sure that I am really valuing each faculty member's work, or times when I encourage them to ask somebody else, because I want to make sure that they are having absolutely the best guidance. And so that's a workshop that I think would really benefit people, and to understand when in their trajectory might be the right time for the right types of projects, where to spend that energy.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to thank you for your time today, Dr. Trent, and your generosity, the wisdom that you've shared with all of us present, and for those who will catch the replay of Transitions in Leadership. It's been amazing hosting you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am honored.